The late afternoon sun painted Buckingham Palace in golden hues, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the courtyard like quiet sentinels. The air was tinged with the crisp scent of early autumn, dry leaves skittered across the stone, stirred occasionally by a stray breeze that rolled in from St. James's Park. Tourists gathered along the black wrought iron fence, their conversations hushed by awe, their phones lifted skyward, capturing the regal stillness of Britain's most iconic landmark. At the center of that stillness stood a figure draped in tradition, a royal guard in full ceremonial uniform, crimson tunic glowing like a flame against the pale stone of the palace behind him. His polished boots stood in perfect symmetry. The rifle in his grip was positioned with mathematical precision, the butt resting on the ground, the barrel reaching up past his shoulder. The gleaming brass buttons on his coat caught the sun, flashing like miniature beacons of discipline. His black bearskin hat, tall, heavy, and ceremonial, towered above his stoic face, casting a shadow over his brow. He did not blink. He did not twitch. He was stone wrapped in skin, flesh wrapped in duty. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know which country you're watching from. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. And then the quiet broke. From the fringe of the crowd, someone pushed forward, a disturbance, first subtle, then unmistakable. The shift in energy was immediate, almost biological. Parents pulled children closer. Tourists lowered their phones. The ripple of unease passed like a shiver through a congregation. He came like a force of discord, a rough and angry shape against the order and ceremony of the palace grounds. Marcus Thorne, his boots struck the stone courtyard with an uneven cadence, not from lack of strength, but from deliberate aggression. Each step was a declaration, a message sent into the brittle air. I do not belong here, and I do not care. He was tall, broad, and carried himself with the kind of swagger that came not from confidence but from defiance. Tattoos crawled up his forearms and neck like vines on a ruined wall, faded prison ink, rough lines that spoke of time served, but not time changed. His knuckles were scarred from fights long forgotten, the skin stretched tight like old leather over bone. His eyes, pale and predator-like, scanned the courtyard not in admiration but in calculation. He was not here to witness tradition. He was here to test it. Two elderly women, mid-photo, noticed him first. They exchanged a glance, the universal, wordless recognition of threat, and moved away, clutching their handbags with new tension. A father pulled his young son to his side, voice low but firm. "Stay close, all right?" he whispered, placing himself between the stranger and his child. Thorne didn't care. Their fear fed him. He stepped past the barriers, his presence now impossible to ignore. Tourists backed away, instinct. The crowd had grown still, not the reverent stillness of tourists appreciating a royal ceremony, but the brittle, breath-held silence of people watching something unnatural unfold. Marcus Thorne stood mere inches from the royal guard, his shoulders squared, his voice loud enough to echo off the stone walls of Buckingham Palace. In his mind, he was the one commanding the stage now. The crowd, the cameras, the tension, all of it fed his twisted sense of dominance. You think that uniform makes you untouchable? Thorne spat the words with venom, circling the motionless guard. Standing there like you're some war hero. You're not. You're a guy in a costume. A puppet. He jabbed a thumb toward the guard's tall bearskin hat. This ridiculous coat, you're a clown. A decoration. I could walk right up, take that gun off your hands, and no one would stop me. The guard stood exactly as before, motionless, eyes fixed forward, rifle vertical at his side. But beneath that ceremonial calm, something simmered. Something old. Something sharpened in real combat, far from the pageantry of London. He had been trained not just to endure this, but to assess it, measure threat, calculate danger, and respond when the moment required. His heartbeat did not race. His breath did not falter. But he saw Thorne for what he was, not just a provocateur, but a line waiting to be crossed. To the untrained eye, the guard's stillness appeared passive, like marble carved into man. But two sets of eyes in the crowd saw differently. The veterans, they had not moved from their position near the gate, but they watched with growing unease. The older one adjusted his stance slightly, hands behind his back. Fingers twitching against the memories of action. He'd worn that red tunic once, decades ago. He knew exactly how hard it was to stand still when chaos pressed close. His friend leaned in. He's going to escalate. You can see it. Yeah, the other replied, eyes never leaving Thorn. He's working himself up to something. Thorn, meanwhile, played to his audience. He moved around the guard in a slow orbit, like a wolf studying a tethered horse. I've seen real soldiers, he said. Men who've fought, who've bled. You're just a museum piece. A wax figure with a plastic gun. The word plastic echoed oddly in the air. Somewhere in the crowd, a man scoffed under his breath. A woman whispered to her partner, "Is this real?" Another, clutching her phone, lowered it slowly, realizing that what she was witnessing wasn't for entertainment, it was something darker. Thorn stopped in front of the guard again and raised his voice. You hear me? Or does the fancy uniform come with instructions not to speak until your master whistles? Still nothing, and that silence, that perfect, impenetrable silence, gnawed at him. Bet you love this, don't you? Thorn said, narrowing his eyes. All these tourists taking pictures. Standing still like you matter. But let me tell you something, you don't. You're just part of the scenery. He leaned in close enough that the brim of his cap nearly brushed the guard's chin. You think I can't get a rise out of you? The crowd's discomfort deepened. Some people began to back away, slowly, cautiously. Others watched with helpless anticipation, not sure if they were witnessing the lead-up to an arrest, a fight, or something worse. A young mother whispered to her daughter, urging her toward the gate, but the girl couldn't tear her eyes away, and still, the guard did not flinch, his rifle remained in place. His shoulders were square. His gaze was locked forward, past the palace, beyond the threat, into the discipline drilled into him through years of service. Afghanistan. Iraq. Patrols through hostile cities. Ambushes. Firefights. The mask of ceremonial detachment he wore now had been forged in far more lethal crucibles. Thorn stepped even closer. Now, his boots were within striking distance. His breath clouded faintly in the air as it struck the cold metal buttons on the guard's chest. He raised a hand and gestured mockingly toward the uniform, all dressed up like some Christmas decoration, he said, voice rising. A red coat and a hat made out of, what is that, badger? Bear? Who knows? Probably fake. He laughed, loud and bitter. I bet you sweat like a pig in that thing. Marching around in your boots, pretending to matter. You ever do anything real, huh? Ever been shot at? Or are you just playing army man with your toy gun and shiny buttons? The veterans exchanged glances again. He's pushing limits now, one said quietly. Touching distance. The other nodded. If he lays a hand on him. They didn't finish the thought. Back in the courtyard, Thorn was pacing again, now a performer, aware of his audience, intoxicated by the silence he controlled. He pointed a finger at the guard, then turned back to the bystanders. Look at him. What's he supposed to be? A defender of the crown? He chuckled bitterly. He's a statue. A statue with no spine. I could walk right up, take his hat, and all he'd do is blink. Still no movement. That's when the mood in Thorn shifted. Something in his performance turned. The mockery became frustration. The sneer began to twist into something darker. He wasn't just playing anymore, he was becoming genuinely angry that the guard refused to react. You're not a man, he hissed. You're a mask. A puppet. And I've seen enough masks in my time. He leaned in again, so close now that the veins in his neck pulsed beneath the ink of his tattoos. You think your silence makes you strong? It doesn't. It makes you weak. I could destroy you right now, and you'd stand there and take it. That's what this is, isn't it? A game. Let's see how far I can push before the toy breaks. In the crowd, a teenage boy pulled out his phone, but his father put a firm hand on his shoulder. Not this, he said. Put that away. A little further back, a young girl, maybe 7, tugged at her grandfather's sleeve. Why is he being so mean? She asked. The old man didn't respond. He just stared at the man in the red tunic and the man trying so desperately to break him. Back in the center of it all, Thorn smiled again, not the cocky smile from before, but a cruel, private one. A smile that meant escalation. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled something out, a pair of cheap sunglasses. He put them on with exaggerated flair, mocking the stoicism of the guard, then he leaned in one last time. I'm gonna crack you open, he whispered. Piece by piece. For several long minutes, Marcus Thorn had danced just along the edge of the line, provoking, insulting, circling, daring the silent royal guard to break his stillness. And despite the escalating hostility, the guard had held firm. The crowd had shifted from curious to anxious. From amused to on edge, and now hovered somewhere between fear and disbelief, but the moment was approaching, a shift in tone, in intent. The air thickened with the silent prelude to something irreversible. Thorn's eyes burned with growing frustration. The silence, the impenetrable composure of the man before him, felt like a slap to his pride. The guard's refusal to react, to even acknowledge him, had become a mirror to everything Thorn couldn't stand: order, restraint, dignity, and he couldn't take it anymore. You know what? He growled, taking a half-step forward, his boots scraping against the courtyard stone with a rough, dragged motion. Let's see what this costume's really made of. With no warning, his hand shot out and grabbed the nearest object on the guard's uniform, a medal. A silver campaign commendation, mounted perfectly in line on the soldier's chest, glinting in the late sunlight. It wasn't just decoration. It was earned. Worn for blood and fire and nights too long to forget, Thorn's fingers closed around it. The metal clinked softly as it rattled on its mounting, and for the first time that day, a visible shift passed through the crowd, gasps. Audible now, the veterans, still watching from the side, went rigid. Bloody hell, the older one muttered. He touched him. His friend's voice was flat. He doesn't know what he's done. But Thorn didn't stop. He tugged on the metal slightly, letting it sway, then flicked it with his finger. Once, twice, a sharp, disrespectful sound that echoed louder than it should have. His face twisted into a sneer. Nice collection of tin, he said, voice low but dripping with contempt. What did you do to earn this one, huh? Stand really still in the rain. He let go of that metal and moved to another, a dull bronze one, partially worn, its ribbon slightly frayed. Thorn didn't know what it meant. How could he? But the guard did. That one had come from Kandahar. 2 of his friends hadn't made it back from that tour. The ribbon had caught the blood of a man who died in his arms. Thorn flicked that one, too. Probably bought it at a costume shop, he said. Still no reaction. To the outside world, it seemed as though the guard hadn't noticed, as though he were still lost in that ceremonial trance. But inside, the soldier's body was responding the way a battlefield veteran's does, pulse slowing, not speeding, muscles tightening in all the right places, breathing deepening in anticipation of what might come next. But Thorn was too blinded by ego to notice. You're not a real soldier, he said, pressing his face in closer. You're a mascot. Then he did something no one expected. He reached up and grabbed the collar of the guard's tunic. The fabric, pristine and pressed, crumpled under his grip. It was a direct violation of the guard's person, not just a symbolic insult, but a physical one. In that moment, Thorn wasn't just mocking tradition, he was laying hands on a soldier. The crowd responded in a sharp wave of movement and breath. Some people gasped. Others stepped back. A child in the crowd cried out softly. One of the mothers whispered harshly, "Oh my God, he touched him." Thorn didn't let go. He tugged slightly at the collar, wrinkling it more. What's this even made of? He muttered. Cheap polyester. Feels fake. Like everything else about this little pageant. The royal guard remained still, but something had shifted again, a deeper, almost invisible change in posture. His shoulder rolled slightly back. His rifle was still in place, but now it looked like it belonged in a soldier's grip, not a ceremonial prop. The stillness had become coiled energy. A trap waiting to spring. The two veterans exchanged one final glance. He's past the line now, the younger one said. He's not going to get another warning, the other replied, but Thorn still didn't see it. In his mind, he was in control. His whole life had been about escalating until someone either folded or fought, and in those moments, he liked his chances. You think you can just stand there and ignore me? He growled. Think your silence makes you better. He shoved the metal rose slightly. It jingled, metal against metal. Well, I've got news for you. This act? It's a joke. All of it. You're a joke. You're just a man in a costume who can't fight back. His hand dropped from the collar and ran across the polished brass buttons on the guard's chest. He smeared fingerprints across their mirror-like finish, all for show. Just like you. A few yards away, a security guard on the outer fence had started speaking into his radio. But the call was late. The line had already been crossed. The uniform had already been touched. The rifle was next. Thorn stepped to the side, dragging his hand across the barrel of the rifle. Let's see what happens when someone pulls your little toy away, he muttered, his fingers closing around the cold metal. The guard's posture stiffened just enough for a trained eye to see. The tourists didn't recognize it, but the veterans did. So did Thorn, not consciously, but deep in his body, a primitive part of him felt it. Some ancestral instinct curled a warning deep in his spine. The feeling that the prey he had mocked was no longer prey at all. He paused for a moment. His fingers, resting on the rifle's barrel, hesitated. The guard had still not moved, but now, he felt alive. Tense. Ready, and for the briefest of moments, Thorn almost pulled his hand away, almost, but pride had taken the wheel now. His sneer returned. What's wrong, toy soldier? He whispered. Worried I'll mess up your costume? He let his hand drop to the trigger guard. The crowd was silent, not breathing. Even the pigeons in the courtyard seemed to have vanished, and then Thorn spoke the words that would mark the end of provocation. And the beginning of consequence. Let's find out what happens, he said, when we take this little show and rip it wide open. His grip tightened, and the guard's stillness, the sacred, unshakable stillness, began to shift. Thorn's hand was now fully wrapped around the ceremonial rifle. His knuckles whitened as he clenched, bracing to yank it away like a prize torn from a shelf. His mouth twisted into a smile of triumph, a smile forged from arrogance and ignorance. The courtyard watched in frozen suspense. The moment his muscles tightened to pull, the royal guard moved, and when he moved like a soldier trained not for show, but for war. It was instantaneous. One moment, Thorn stood smugly gripping the rifle like a trophy. The next, a blur of crimson and brass struck like lightning. The guard pivoted, fluid, silent, brutal, and brought the rifle up, reversing its direction with stunning speed. The butt of the weapon, a heavy, reinforced wooden stock, snapped upward and drove with precision into the center of Thorn's chest. The impact landed directly in the solar plexus, the nerve cluster beneath the ribs that governs breath and balance. The crack of wood against flesh rang through the square like a gunshot. Thorn's body jerked back violently. His eyes flew wide open as all the air was punched from his lungs in a single, stunned exhale. He staggered. His boots scraped loudly against the courtyard stone, arms flailing to regain balance. The sneer, that bitter, cocky grin, vanished in an instant. Replaced by a mask of confusion and raw shock. He wasn't used to being hit. Not like this. Not by a man who hadn't even moved for 10 minutes straight. He stumbled backward, coughing, clutching at his stomach. You can't, He wheezed, his voice no longer loud, no longer cruel, just broken and breathless. That's assault. But the words were hollow. Powerless. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone knew who had escalated. The tourists, once hesitant and scattered, now watched in silent awe. Phones had dropped to people's sides. Some simply stared, eyes wide, the moment seared into memory, and the royal guard, he had already returned to position, as if nothing had happened. The rifle, still very real, still very capable, rested at attention once more. His posture was perfect. His eyes, locked forward. But now, the air around him felt different. Heavy. Sharp. Radiating something that had been hidden beneath the scarlet uniform all along, not pageantry, but power. The two veterans near the gate nodded to each other. Told you, one muttered. Combat trained. Textbook response, the other said. Strike. Reposition. No wasted motion. They'd seen it before. Not in ceremony. But in combat zones. In alleyways where things turned ugly in seconds. That kind of readiness, it never left a man. Thorne, meanwhile, still staggered near the edge of the courtyard, hunched slightly, trying to collect the pieces of his pride. You don't get to, he started again, then choked. His voice cracked under the strain of catching his breath. His ego, however, was far less winded than his lungs. His face, now flushed red with embarrassment and rage, twisted into something feral. You think you're tough? Thorne hissed, teeth bared. That was a lucky shot. Let's see how you handle a real fight. The crowd of tourists instinctively backed away. Thorne had crossed the line, and worse, he wasn't backing down. A smarter man would have walked away. A wiser one would have apologized. But Thorne was neither. He was wounded, and in men like him, wounded pride often turns dangerous. He clenched his fists and shuffled forward. The royal guard remained motionless, a pillar of red and black. Yet now he radiated the same tension as a drawn bowstring, silent, but ready. The rifle by his side was no longer ceremonial in the eyes of the crowd. It was real. A weapon. And something had shifted. Two officers at the gate had taken notice. One was already on the radio. Backup was coming. But would it be in time? Thorne began pacing, breath ragged, voice bitter. You're nothing without that toy, he sneered. You think you can hit me and get away with it? He stepped forward. Once. Twice. Then again, I'm going to take that rifle, he growled. Then we'll see who's got the power. A couple pulled their child away. Another tourist dialed the emergency number. Thorne's posture coiled. His boots hit the ground hard, he lunged, the guard moved, not with a blur, but with cold, measured precision. The rifle rose, not to strike, but to fire. The shot shattered the air, sharp and final. Gunpowder stung the breeze. Thorne froze mid-lunge. Arms half raised. Eyes wide, his rage melted into terror. His breath hitched. For the first time, fear showed on his face, real fear, the kind that comes when a man realizes he's outmatched. His whisper was small, I didn't think. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The tourists stood silent. The sound of the gunshot still rang in their ears, but its message had already landed. This wasn't a show. This was real. The guard wasn't there for pageantry. He was trained, disciplined, prepared. And he had waited until the very last moment to act. Sweat broke on Thorne's brow. He didn't blink. Couldn't. He was staring down the reality he'd mocked just moments ago. The silence shattered again, this time by a sharp voice. Armed police, stay where you are. 3 officers entered the courtyard in a tight triangle, weapons drawn but angled down. The lead officer's voice rang out again, step away from the guard. Now. But Thorne couldn't move. Fear had rooted him to the spot. His eyes flicked between the officers and the guard, who stood calm, composed, a sentinel once more. Only his eyes betrayed the edge of readiness behind the stillness. A second officer stepped behind Thorne, hands where I can see them. Kneel. For a second, Thorne hesitated. The fire in his ego hadn't fully gone out. But it was too late. His pride had brought him here, and now it was over. Kneel. And he did. The same man who had barked threats and lunged with fists clenched now sank to his knees on the cold palace stones. His hands trembled. His face sagged. No more posturing. Just defeat. Handcuffs clicked. Rights were read. From across the square, an older veteran approached the officers. Medals glinted on his chest. I saw everything, he said. The lead officer nodded. Go ahead. Deliberate provocation. He initiated contact. Tried to grab the rifle. What you saw was restraint. If this happened in our time, he wouldn't be walking. His companion joined him. That guard waited until he had no other choice. Another officer approached, suspect subdued. No resistance. Charge him, the lead officer said. Attempted disarmament of an active duty soldier. Thorne was led away, his face caught between rage and dread. But he had no fight left in him. This wasn't a bar brawl. This was Buckingham Palace. And he had challenged tradition, discipline, and lost. The crowd now stood in reverent quiet. Cameras lowered. No whispers. A child tugged at his father's coat. Dad, is that why they say not to touch the guards? His father knelt. Yes. Because they're not just guards. They're soldiers. The boy stared at the silent figure and read. He would remember this. The police van turned the corner. A long hush remained, then, slowly, people began to step closer. Not to speak. Not to intrude. But to look. To understand. He didn't move, he didn't nod, he simply stood, perfectly still, and that stillness was no longer mysterious. It was earned. It meant something now. The older veteran returned. He didn't salute. He didn't speak. He just stood beside the guard for a few seconds. Eyes forward, posture firm, then walked away. Not all who wear the uniform do it the same. But those who've earned it, they understand what it means. Behind him, a child asked a question. Why do they just stand so still? A good question. And one the day had answered. They stood still not because they were powerless, but because they were powerful enough to wait. They didn't act until they had to. That was the discipline. That was the job. It wasn't showmanship, it was readiness. The sun dipped behind the palace. Shadows grew long. Voices returned, but softer. More thoughtful. Videos would go viral. Headlines would flash. But the guard? He resumed his post, as before. Because nothing had changed for him. This was never theater, it was duty, and beneath that red coat was not a performer, but a soldier. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.